Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's fall is off to a good start. We're going to talk today, or I'm going to talk today a little bit about addressing state testing vocabulary. I said in the speech room, but actually I prefer to out of the speech room. The next slide didn't come up. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Just had to scroll. There you go. Computer literacy. The kind of objective here is that we're going to talk about, I'm hoping to give you a couple of strategies for tackling this kind of vocabulary in your practice with kids on your caseload. So just a quick minute here on why I wanted to talk about this. So high stakes testing, no matter how you feel about it personally, is here to stay. And they don't call it high stakes for nothing. It's used to get state dollars. It's used to get federal dollars. Parents are making enrollment decision based on state testing results. It's a big deal. And if you are in the public schools, you already know that. So the thing is that no matter how many accommodations and modifications we write onto that IEP, our students with identified disabilities and our kiddos that are from poverty are entering the testing season at a distinct disadvantage. So this all came about when a colleague, a colleague of mine, Brooke Unwin, and I were at a school with that was identified as having among the lowest performing 5% of SPED students in the state. They had among the lowest performing 10% of ELL students and between 80 and 85% free and reduced lunch. So these were some needy kiddos. And with those kinds of numbers, you can imagine there was quite a lot of money flowing into the building to get those kinds of scores up, and also a lot of attention being paid to the scores by gen ed and special ed alike. And so Brooke and I really wanted to be a part of that, and we asked ourselves what our part could possibly be, and we kind of came up with this, what I call the essential question. So the essential question for us was that how can our students demonstrate content knowledge when they don't have the underlying vocabulary knowledge to understand the question? So then we decided to modify a program that we were already doing. We were already doing a push-in model for teaching curriculum vocabulary. So we decided to go ahead and adapt that and use it to teach test-taking vocabulary. So now I'm going to walk you through that model. I'm going to cruise along. Feel free to type in questions as you think of them, and I can address them on the fly or at the end. And then also I have included some resources there. Can they see the PowerPoint? Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. So they're highlighted in blue or they're written in blue on the slides. If it flies by too fast for you, you can ask me to go back over it, or you can send me an email, kelly.bawden@thehellowfoundation.com, and I'm happy to shoot those to you in an email. So, the model. The first thing that you need to do, and what we did, is select our vocabulary. It's just like any other intervention. You need a target. And the way we did this is we went through all sorts of released materials. And released materials is just the word that the testing industry uses to talk about testing materials that they have kind of released from under lock and key. So they're practice tests, they're practice tests, they're old tests, they're things released for teachers to help teach to the test. And again, might have some personal emotions about testing, state testing, and what this all means for all of us, but this is what's happening, and this is what our kids have to do. So go through a hunk of release materials and select some vocabulary, and we went on frequency of occurrence. So we're going to look at a couple questions here in a minute, but here, the links that I've given you, there's one here for the State of Washington State Testing website. It's a really nice website, actually, that has a lot of information, a lot of materials. They have their own vocabulary that they've come up with. That's content vocabulary that they think is important. So that's the State of Washington, that k12.wa.us. And then the other one is the Smarter Balanced pilot test, and as we all know, Common Core is sweeping the nation, and Smarter Balanced Assessment is the Common Core assessment. This will soon be the test that every student in the country, or nearly every student in the country, is taking. Washington is adopting, I believe, in 14-15. Oregon adopted this year. You can check in with your state and see where they're at with adopting Smarter Balanced. But and, you know, go on and take that test, because I took it and it was hard. So I think it's worthwhile to go on and really see kind of what our students are doing. And if you have kids at home, also see what they're doing. So let's look. Oh, that was the wrong button. So these are some actual test questions that I wanted to kind of go through with you and show you what I'm talking about when I talk about test-taking vocabulary versus content or curriculum vocabulary. So this first one here is from the 3rd grade reading MSP, which is the Washington State Test. And I've put the target words in red. So here it says, what is most likely the author's purpose in writing this selection? So something like most likely is a pretty tough concept for some of our kiddos, because most likely, what does it mean? It means probably. It means that there's going to be 4 answers on that multiple choice, and none of them is probably going to be exactly right. So their job is to pick the one that is probably right. It's a tough concept. And also selection. Brooke and I were consistently amazed at how words like this really tripped up our kids. So selection is what is the selection? What are they talking about? So if the student has read through the passage that's included, what does it mean to go back to the selection? If they thought it was a story and then they see selection, they might be flipping through that booklet. And any of you who've been involved in test proctoring have seen our poor kiddos just flipping through that booklet maniacally and burning time, and it's awful. So the next one here is from Smarter Balanced, 4th grade English test. Read this sentence from the passage and the directions that follow. Again, words like sentence, you'd think by the time kids are in 4th grade, they could pretty accurately figure out what a sentence is. Not necessarily the case. And follow. I wanted to highlight that one because if you're a speech path, you have almost every language kid on your caseload is going to struggle with concepts. Follow is a concept. It's a directional concept. And just reading that word alone can throw a student off. So they can't demonstrate what they actually know because they're trying to figure out what the directions even mean. And this last one is a doozy. I just threw it in just because I think this is incredible. Oh, Sarah can't see the slides. Tears on it. So, and I can always send the PowerPoint out too. Okay. All right, so this next one is, you will now look at your sources, take notes, plan, draft, revise, and edit your article. You may use your notes and go back to the sources. Now read your assignment and the information about how your opinion article will be scored, then begin your work. 5th grade English Language Arts Performance Assessment. That's what your 5th graders are reading and having to figure out what to do. We went through, just before I move on, went through, made a big long list. We used hash marks, figured out what occurred most often, and then made a choice from there. You might do it a little bit differently. But basically, you just want to make a big long list of a series of targets that you're going to hit. So then you do a pretest, or we did a pretest. And what you want to assess is how well they can verbally define your target, how well they think they understand it, and how well they can visually represent it. I'm going to show you the data sheet that we use to do that. One of my favorite things about this model is that the data keeping is integrated in what you're doing, and so you're saving yourself a step, which is always nice. Here in blue you see Building Academic Vocabulary by Marzano and Pickering. I highly recommend this book for this kind of intervention, and then just generally it's a wonderful book for gen ed, and it's a great book for teaming with gen ed. So let's see, your little assessment, it's a quickie, little 15 minutes or so. Oh, geez, I keep hitting the button. Let me hit the button. This is the data sheet and your little pre and post assessment. So it's a half sheet, and you can see there's a place there for them to write down the term. It's important that if you've got a kiddo who struggles with writing, then scribe it for them. You are trying to get to the root of what they know, not trying to assess their disability in writing. So if you need to write it for them, or their fine motor deficit or whatever, if you need to write it for them, fine. So you want to write down the term. If we were going to do most likely, you'd have them write, or you would write most likely. Have them rate their understanding. Here it's a 1, 2, 3, 4. I saw one on the internet just the other day when I was getting this ready, and it had replaced that 1, 2, 3, 4 with faces. So like a happy face, like a flat face, and a sad face. And I thought that was great. I might take that because it's a little more visual. But this helps you understand, if they think they know it and they don't, then you have a whole nother issue to address, versus if they know they don't know it and they don't know it. And then you'll have them write down, or you will write for them, what the word means, what the term means, and then draw it out. As we know, a lot of times kids might be able to draw something out that they can't necessarily articulate. So once you have this, we sent them off to the print shop, had them all bound together in a book. So they had a vocabulary book of these half sheets, because you're going to use the same thing for your post test. But I've also used them just individually, had them in the kiddo speech folder. So it's all just on how kind of intense you want to be, how speech pathy you want to get on it. So next step is intervention. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, just because this is what we do. We know how to intervene in teaching vocabulary. You're going to look at that pretest. You're going to see where their error is, what they don't get. Do they totally not get it? Do they kind of get it? And use all your usual tricks. You give them little tricks to remember it. You give them visuals. You play games. You get out the Play-Doh. You do whatever it is that you're going to do. Brooke and I did a model where we pushed in and did whole class teaching. We did a whole class teaching, and then the teacher taught it in a quickie, 10-minute, another time during the week, and then we pulled out the kiddos on our caseload and did another, we call a booster session. That was the model we did. But there's no kind of right or wrong way to do it. I've also done it in other buildings where I was the only one doing this intervention. The general guideline is intervene for about 60 minutes per word, so that whether, depending on how long your sessions are and what you're doing, that's 2 or 3 sessions. I have another book here by Marzano and Pickering It's called Vocabulary Games for the Classroom. There's nothing in there that's particularly earth-shattering as far as things to do. But again, it's a nice bridge. It's written with Gen Ed in mind, and it does have some good ideas and helps with the collaboration with Gen Ed if you're going to do that piece. And so after you've done all your intervention, then your next step is your post-test. So that's going to look exactly like the pre-test, using that same data sheet, or not the same one, a new blank one. So you're going to have a pre-test and a post-test. And the student, this is where having them all in a booklet is a nice way to do it, because you can track over time how they're doing, and they're all in one spot. So once you do your post-test, then, there we go. Then the analysis. And this is where I think it really is it's nice if you're on a 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, some sort of model where you have a data week where you can really look at this. The way that Brooke and I did it, we were on a 3-1 and we switched ourselves to a 4-1, just because it seemed like that's what the students, that was something that the students kind of settled into. But we would use that off week to really look at the pre-test and post-test, score them out here, like I'm going to talk about, and then make some decisions about what to do next. So the rubric that we came up with to score, again, not based on science or anything other than wanting to have some level of some level of reliability among ourselves and across the year. We then looked at each pre-test and post-test, and when we were doing this whole class intervention, we did it for the entire class. So we'd have a big stack of 30 for each class. We'd look at them, and for each one, we'd give a 1, 2, a 3, or a 4. A 1 if they have no clue, basically, no clue. They couldn't verbally talk about it, they couldn't write it, they couldn't draw it out, they couldn't do anything. We give them a 2 if they had some kind of limited verbal idea about what it is, or they could kind of draw it out, they had some level of understanding what they were talking about. We gave them a 3 if they seemed to have a pretty solid visual of it. I'm trying to think of a good example. I'll think of one. But a solid visual representation of it, and kind of an emerging verbal understanding of it, and then it gave them a 4 if they had mastered a verbal. And the visual at that point is, if they can do it verbally, then they're fine. So we went through, good question, Kira. We scored all of those, and then made our decisions about next targets. And we kept track of all this in a giant spreadsheet, so we could then look at where improvement was, look and see if this was working at all, or if we were really not doing well, which we sometimes really didn't do very well. So if kids had a score of 1 or 2, we would do one of two things. We'd revisit that same target. So if we were teaching most likely, everybody got 1 or 2, we'd go, okay, let's try this again. How else can we teach it? What else can we do to change it up? The other thing that we found that we had to do actually quite a bit was think about the concept or the word that we were teaching and reteach it, except lower. So really think about what the foundational concept was. So for most likely, for some of our students, we had to teach that like right answer and wrong answer. And that was the lower target. Once they learned that sometimes there was a right answer and wrong answer, then we could talk about most likely. So that was for a 1 or 2. And if they have a 3 or 4, then we'd move on to the next target in the list. So Kira has written, what do you think about teaching multiple words at a time? Better to pre-test, teach, post-test each word one at a time before moving on. We never did multiple words at a time. We kind of did concept units sometimes where we would do that sort of idea of we did passage, paragraph, sentence, those as a unit. But we always pre-tested and post-tested each word individually. I'm trying to think if that's actually, I'm pretty sure that's true. Okay, so that is my last slide. Is there any more questions out there? Kira's typing. One question I do get asked sometimes is about administrator approval and how to make that all work. My experience has been that whenever you sit down with an administrator and you talk about improving test scores, they pretty much will let you do whatever you want to do that. So that's been my experience. The one place you might have to try and wiggle around a little bit is getting yourself so you have an off week to really pay attention to what's happening, to have the time to do that, or figuring out a way to flex your schedule out to do that. And the way I've always had good success with Gen Ed buying in, not across the board. In fact, last year we had a teacher who we put everything into it, and we got midway through the year and we looked at our data and the kids just weren't making progress. There was no work being done in the classroom, and so we had to go to a complete pull-out model. So that happens too. But generally, I've had good luck with Gen Ed participating. Let's see. Kira has another question. Middle and high school. Yeah, I've done this. I haven't ever done it in high school, but I did it in middle school. Worked really well. And actually, in middle school, it's even more important because that gap has typically gotten bigger. And really no one's paying attention to whether or not our kids know what the question says. Oftentimes in middle school they'll have kind of a resource, not quite self-contained. The kids are pulled out a little bit. They're going out into Gen Ed for some, and they're kind of in a resource room. Resource room teacher let me bully my way in there and do the intervention. So it works great with middle school, and they also, their writing skills are a little more evolved, and so it really works nicely with middle school. I imagine it would work with high school. I would certainly try it. Anybody else? Any other questions? Kira's typing. Oh yeah, speech room only. Yeah, so like I said, we definitely had to do that, and I have done that in the past. I would say that if you can share what you're doing with the Gen Ed teacher, like any intervention, communicating what you're working on with Gen Ed is going to help everybody. And the one thing, you may be able to move at a little quicker pace if you're in the speech room, depending on whether or not you're doing one-on-one or groups. Marzano and Pickering talk a lot about the importance of multiple interventions over the course of the week, and we all know that as speech pathologically, like the more practice you get over time, the better off you're going to be. So that's a really, it might, if you're doing exclusively pull-out, you might want to do it more frequently. So smaller sessions more frequently. Emily from Rainier. Yes, so Emily says, is this a year-long program? This seems time-consuming. When do you address their other IEP goals? That's a really good question. It can be a year-long program. I've done it year-long. Also, the nature of me being a contractor, I also am plopped down places a lot, just sort of in the middle of a year, and I don't know how long I'm going to be there. And so doing things much for a shorter amount of time, even just for the month leading up to state testing. So really starting this in February is a great thing to do, especially, and you know, you got the February blues, you're out of ideas, you got nothing else, can't think of anything else to do. This is a great thing. So the other IEP goals for language kiddos, I typically write vocabulary goals. This is vocabulary intervention. So if you have a goal that addresses vocabulary of any kind, if you have a concepts goal, this is covered. Other kinds of IEP goals, obviously you're not going to hit our TIC doing this. I'm trying to think. This would hit a WH question goal. So maybe to answer your question, addressing your other IEP goals in the context of that intervention period that you're in. So when you're doing your intervention, if you're teaching most likely, then what you might focus your intervention around doing WH questions to teach most likely. Does that make sense? Kind of. I'm of the school that vocabulary relates to everything, so it's usually what I work on. But yeah, I do know other people write other goals in other areas. Any other questions? 27 minutes, are you? Okay, so that's it. And again, if you want me to send anything to you, I'm happy to do that. Kelly.Bawden@thehellofoundation.com. And have a great day. Oh, and then, okay, bye.